And hello everyone, welcome back to another CSS tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be talking about the transform property. So here let me just go and select both of these and make sure their background color is red, their width is 500 pixels, and their height is 500 pixels. 500 maybe a little bit much, let's go 100. There we go. Then I select hashtag margin, and let's actually change its background color also to red, but let's go RGBA, and let's go 0.5. There we go. And in the inner can have a background color of red. Now let's take a look at the transform property. So we'll first start by just looking at translate. So transform translate, and here let's say 50 pixels and 50 pixels. Now you'll notice this is where it started. So this is the div it is inside of, and it has moved 50 pixels downwards and 50 pixels left or right. So now it is here. So what translate does, it is basically moves your object to a specific location. So if we were to go here and say position, absolute, left 50%, top 50%, you'll notice it's not quite in the center. This part of it is in the center, but the rest of it is not in the center. We can go transform, translate, and we can specify negative 50%. And note that everything inside translate is relative to the component, to the element, and not to the page. So when we say this, we're basically saying take 50% of this square and move it to the left. Then take the other 50% of the square on the bottom, so here, and move that up. So when we hide this, you'll notice this part is in the center, but when we do this, we basically make the center this part here, in a sense, so the very center of the square. That is how this translate works. Relative to the object, it will move it. So here we could have gone negative 50 pixels and negative 50 pixels instead. Negative, of course. And we would have gotten the same effect. The reason we said percentage here is because if we were to ever change this to, let's say, 200 pixels, then it will no longer be accurate, because now this needs to be boosted to 100 pixels. Because we need to move it 100 pixels to the left and 100 pixels to the top. So that's what this translate does. It basically takes an existing element. We can then tell that element to move more to a specific location depending on how we want it. When we use percentage, like 50% and 50%, this means add 50% or move 50% of this element's width and height to the respective locations. So now it will be even further there. Translate is somewhat difficult to wrap your head around, but it's actually very, very simple. Because we have to open up our drawing application. Let's say this is our square, right? Now our starting point or our center, when we use that absolute positioning, would be here. But when we use translate negative 50%, that means, okay, take this. So let's just go translate. Imagine that T is for translate, negative 50%. We're saying take this width right here and move it here. That's what we're saying. So take 50% of the width of this element and move it to the left. If we're to not have this subtractor, it will move it to the right. And of course, if we have another negative 50%, then that will mean, and take this here and move it to the top. So we'll take 50% of the height of the y-axis of this element and move it upwards. If there was no negative, it will move it downwards. So that's basically what translate does. It's very simple, but it might be difficult to wrap your head around it. Next, we have rotate. So transform, and let's make sure everything's back where it was. There we go. And then rotate, and here we can say 20 degrees. Now, as you can see, it rotates it by 20 degrees. We can maybe just go here and say margin free rem. There we go. So rotate is pretty simple. It will just rotate it the amount of degrees you want it to rotate. And you can, of course, rotate to the other direction. So negative 50 degrees instead of 50 degrees. You can also scale it, meaning it scales to go bigger or smaller. So scale. Now this here will scale it times the amount you put in here. So 1, 1, meaning don't scale. It'll basically stay the same. If we say 2, it scales it 2 times the width. If we say 2 here, it will scale it 2 times the height. So it basically increases the size times the amount you want it. So in this case, it will go from 100 pixels to 200 pixels, 200 pixels. And we can prove that by going here and changing these to 2, and you won't see a difference other than the fact that it's just being repositioned. To make it go smaller, you can use 0, so 0.5. That'll make it half its original size. So as you can see here, that's only half the size. 0.1, now it's only 10% its original size. You can do the same by just using specific ones such as scale X. That will only scale the X axis, so we go 2, as you can see. And you can of course use scale Y to only scale the Y axis. If you just use scale, you can scale both the X and the Y axis. Now you can also use skew X, and it will make it skew along the X axis at a given angle, so 20 degrees. And you'll notice on the X axis it goes a little bit weird, so it skews to the sides. You also do skew Y for the same effect, and you can use skew as such to skew both ends or both sides. Next up, let's talk about 3D transformations. So let's, as an example, go here and say transform rotate, and let's just go rotate X by 20 degrees. And there's by 20 degrees. Very simple. This is a 2D rotation. For a 3D rotation, you specify the axis, so rotate X would be, and let's go 150 degrees. Now it rotated 150 degrees on the X axis. In this case, we can't quite see it. Now a way for us to see this is if we were to go here and go P, I am cool, you'll see it's actually flipped upside down. If we were to actually make this a little bit smaller, you'll actually notice it does quite a couple of things. So now it's starting to flip back around. Now this might be a little bit confusing, but we have to take it in a sense of these are our axes. So we have our X axis, our Y axis, and our Z axis. Now when we say make our X 150, we're saying basically move this up like that. So our square basically goes like this. Then we were to take a side angle, so this is how our square would look from a side, right? Or if we were to make it a square like this, so this could also be from the side, that's just 2-dimensional, or 1-dimensional, and this is 2-dimensional. Anyhow, then if we skew it, basically what's happening is it goes like this, 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 and then finally we get to this point where it looks like that. That's what's happening. This is our 150 degree angle. So 150, that's 150 degrees afterwards. Basically, it has become upside down. Here, the same will happen. Now, I don't know how to draw this, but it should look something like this or something. I have no idea. I can't draw that well. Basically, it will be maybe like this. And here it would be like this. So this is where the original top was. Then here, that will look next. And this is where the original top was. And then finally here at the bottom, it would be upside down. Hopefully this helped, where I gave you a 1-dimensional and a 2-dimensional representation of how from the side view, of course, of how it flips. So this is the front view. So we'll go F, and both of these are the side views. Side. So that is how it flips on the x-axis in 3D. It's very confusing, but it's not as confusing once you think about it a little bit. You can do the same with y, so we can go rotate y. And now here we could go 150 degrees to flip it as well. And now it is basically flipped. 100 degrees, 50 degrees, and so on. Basically it's doing the same thing, but flipping in the other direction. So here, if we were to take a side view, so this is from the side, then of course, now showing the y-axis from side view is a little bit more difficult for me to do, but or the one-dimensional, so I'll go with the two-dimensional one. So now, it will look like this. There we go. So now basically, it has tilted a little bit, just enough for us basically to see this part behind it. It's very confusing for me to draw the y, as I can't quite visualize it as easily as the x, but basically it does the same as the x, but instead of flipping like this, it instead flips like this. So this is the y, and this is the x. X flips up to down, y flips right to left. Or other way around, not really sure, one of the two. Anyhow. So that is how the y works. But then you also have the z-axis. So let's go here and say z. And now it flips completely on its head. So now it's flipped like that. So basically z flips the square completely from the front view. So z flips from the front view. So when you flip z, it basically goes like that. It flips it like that. Z is a little bit easier to see and understand. So we go 45. Generally, when we flip it in 2D, so we say rotate 45 degrees, it will stay the same. Because in two-dimensional space, we are currently flipping it at the z-axis in CSS by default. So when you say rotate z, you don't see a difference if you change that. Now you can add all of these together by saying rotate 3D. And we can choose a value between 0 and 1. And in the angle, like 45 degrees, that you want it to rotate at. When we go 0, and all of them except for the first one, which is x, y, z, x will only rotate 45 degrees. If we go 150, you'll see it is flipped. If we go 170, it's basically perfectly fit. If you do the same with y, then now we flip like that. And if we do the same with z, then we flip like that. Now this is actually pretty cool, because if we mix inner, hover, redo that. Is that not pretty cool? Now if we say transition, duration, 1 second. Now I have a 3D way of seeing what's happening. So this is actually a great way to show you what has been happening. So let's go here and say rotate x 170 degrees. So this is what I've been showing you from the side view, where it flips all the way until it's upside down. And in the one I was struggling to visualize to you, y, as you can see, as cool as that. And of course z, and then once you add them all together, you get this, where you can transform it into three-dimensional space into what you want. Now you of course have more 3D values you can use. You can use translate x, y, z, or translate 3D to use all of them together. You have scale x, y, z, or scale 3D to scale them all together. And that is the basics of transforming in CSS. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next CSS tutorial.